Canned fruit, just another thing millennials are killing off. Today in panicky farm headlines, canned peach factory shuts down, forcing peach farmers to cut down their trees. So here's the thing, it is obviously a bummer to have to go cut trees down, but it's not an emergency or the death of a rural community the way I'm seeing it reported. Having to cut down fruit trees and replace them with something else is really normal when you're running an orchard. That's part of the job. And that goes double for peach trees because those things only live 10 or 20 years when everything's going well. Peach trees are the most here for a good time, not a long time, of all the fruit trees. So to get to the bottom of this story, we've got to talk about two things here. First, how orchards work. But also, we need to talk, like basic media literacy about farms. There's something that Americans do that we are trained to do, and that is that every time agriculture comes up, we tend to shut our brains off. We kind of go, oh, I don't know much about agriculture, so I have to take the headlines very seriously and listen and learn. I get why people kind of go that route, but it's actually really unhelpful, and we're going to talk about why. When agriculture comes up, we should just be thinking, period. For example, if we hear something like factory that puts peaches in a can is getting shut down, we could think, I guess I don't eat canned peaches as much as I used to. That's thinking, right? You don't have to know anything about agriculture to think at that level. Americans are just eating less canned peaches. That's why this is happening. It's not that weird. And peaches that we use for canning are not very good to eat fresh. I think about the kind of texture that it takes to make it through a high temperature, high pressure canning process. That's not a peach that's going to be pleasant to bite into. So it doesn't make sense to keep growing that kind of peach that's good for canning if you're not going to be canning them. And by the way, it's not just canned peaches that people aren't really eating anymore. It's all canned food, because people are shifting away from that and towards fresh produce and fresh food. Canned fruit, just another thing millennials are killing off. The shift is significant enough that Del Monte, the company that owned that peach cannery, went bankrupt last year. It's not the kind of bankrupt where they just closed down, it's the kind of bankrupt where they're reorganizing and shutting down the parts of the business that were making them lose money. Like canneries for peaches that people aren't even really buying anymore. People are shifting to fresh fruit, which is actually kind of a good thing for orchards. Fruit that we eat fresh generally earns more for the farmer than fruit that gets canned, juiced, frozen, whatever. Peaches for canning probably weren't anybody's top earning acres anyway, and this is happening because there's now an opportunity to plant fresh fruit, something more rewarding. And I think that's really worth mentioning. There is so much nonsense in farm headlines and so much taking advantage of feelings and well-meaning impulses that people have, and it's not helping us. We really need to learn how to think about them a little bit more critically, and I just want to show you guys how. So with that intro out of the way, let's dig in. 5 things that I think are really important to know here. When most people hear orchard, they think long-lasting, multi-generation. There's a lot of sentimental feelings about that. That is not how it works in California peach farming. These are orchards with a job to do. We grow peaches because people want peaches, and if they don't want peaches anymore, why are we growing peaches? We're going to tear them out and grow something else. In a lot of the United States, people are very reluctant to cut down orchards because basically the sunk cost fallacy. We spent all this time and effort growing this thing, and in most of the US, people would have to lose a lot of money on their trees for many years in a row before they decided to cut it down. And in California, they just have a much shorter fuse. I actually really respect that. The sunk cost fallacy is probably how most farms fail. And so it's really nice to see a whole community of farmers that doesn't fall for that. In California, once you don't make money growing something, you just stop growing it. A lot of us farmers in the US could really stand to learn from that, if we're being honest. In the case of peaches that are destined for canning, people have been eating less and less canned peaches for years. Orchardists in California have been keeping an eye on that and already growing less and less of those peaches. By the way, if this is helpful, if you feel like you're learning something, go ahead and give it a like, comment, and subscribe. That really does help the algorithm show it to more people and helps get the word out. And if you really like it, there's a Patreon down below. Thing number 2 that you gotta know about California orchards: nobody has an orchard that's just canning peaches. Peaches are in a group of fruit that we call stone fruit. Peaches, nectarines, apricots, plums, cherries. We call them stone fruit because they're a nice soft fruit with that stone or pit in the middle. Most orchardists who grow peaches grow a bunch of those other stone fruit. I don't think there's really anybody who's got a canning peach ranch, and that's the only thing they're growing. Which is kind of funny because I know people think of California as the big corporate agriculture place where they just have huge fields of one thing. That's not really true. That's an urban legend. Diversifying a farm as much as you can is just common business sense. That's why even city folk know it's a thing you should do, so just think about it. Commercial farmers in California know you have to diversify. They're doing it. You know, if you're an orchardist in California who's growing canning peaches, you've also got blocks of other kinds of fruit like plums, nectarines. Maybe you're planting those little UFO peaches. You really have to remember that orchards in California are a business. They're a job. They are paying attention and they're planning years and years ahead already. If you, the average consumer, just found out that something is happening, they already knew about that 5 or 10 years ago and they've planned ahead for years. You can see that in how California orchards have already been growing less and less canning peaches for years. They saw this coming and prepared accordingly. Do people really think there's orchards out there that are just nothing but canning peaches? That's literally crazy. Thing number 3 that we got to know about peach orchards, they don't live that long. I think when people hear orchard, they hear ancient trees planted by my great-grandfather. And that's not how peach orchards work at all. Peach trees live fast and die young. Just about every fruit tree has a lifespan, right? They have their babyhood, they start bearing fruit, and then they start to decline, get sick, not bear fruit as well. They have a life cycle just like we do. They become adults, they get old, they die. And peach trees have the shortest life cycle of any tree crop. In California, the weather's nice, so they can make it up to 20 years of productive life. Here in the Southeast, you can be looking at more like 10 or 12 years, and then you have to rip your trees out and start over. Because the older and more decrepit your trees get, they need the same amount of water, they need the same or probably even more pesticides and fertilizer to stay healthy, but they're not making as much fruit. It is really wasteful to keep trees in place after they're not producing well anymore. It's bad for the environment. It's not productive. Why would you do that? And so anybody who's got peach orchards is already planning to rip them out after 10, 15, 20 years. So when you hear peach trees are being ripped out, you should not hear, oh no, that's generations of work down the drain. Peach trees are very short-lived, and a lot of those were probably about to be cut down anyway. For a lot of these peach orchards, it's not we're getting rid of a generations old investment. It's just, oh yeah, that block that we were already planning to rip out in 2 or 3 years, we're just going to do it early. If you're growing peach trees, you already planned for that. You already had your finances set up to be able to do that. It's okay. It's okay. Thing number 4 to know about orchards in California. It is very normal to tear out an orchard, even if it is fully productive, just because there's no use for the fruit. No one actually wants it. And plant something else instead. That is a normal thing to do out there. Growers in California just have like no remorse about tearing out something if it's not useful and starting over with something else. I've got a buddy who grew up on an orchard in California, and I think his grandpa or his great-grandpa started it, and he planted walnuts. And that worked well for a generation. Now, when this buddy's grandpa came along, walnuts weren't doing that well financially anymore. So he didn't wallow in pity about it. He just tore out those walnut trees and replaced them with lemons because people wanted lemons and there weren't a lot of people growing them yet. And the way this friend of mine actually describes it is, and then my dad actually got to just keep growing lemons his whole life. That's unusual, because usually around here you gotta rip stuff out and replace it about every generation to keep your farm doing well. You have to stay in tune with what people actually want to eat. So the fact that his dad didn't have to rip out trees and replace them with something new was actually weird. And now that this friend of mine has grown up and he's taken over the farm, he's taking out the lemon trees and he's replacing them with avocados, because avocados are just a way better opportunity right now. But he's also doing it with the understanding that they're not going to last forever. The people who come after him are probably going to replace the avocados with something else. And I think that's just really different from how most people think having an orchard works. We kind of talk about having an orchard like it's a thing that lasts forever. Not everybody does it that way, and that's okay. And now, last but not least, I guess this is thing 5. Even when you have to cut out fruit trees and replace them with something else, it's not a total loss, because you can sell the wood. Where do you sell the wood? Barbecue. If you've ever had fruit wood smoked meat, you know, this bacon, it's smoked with apple wood or peach wood. And where do you think that wood comes from? It comes from old orchards that are getting torn out. Ripping out fruit trees does help kind of pay for itself a little bit. So it is weird to me that the USDA put $9 million towards helping these folks replace their trees, because I kind of think the peach canning company, Del Monte, the company that had contracts with these people and canceled those contracts, maybe they should help pay, because they canceled the contracts and there should be a financial value attached to that when you cancel a contract. That's really the only question I have about this, is why is the taxpayer on the hook for a business decision made by other people who decided to cancel a contract that has a monetary value attached? But that's me. So, okay, so now that we've covered how farmers ripping out orchards and replacing them with something else is kind of business as usual and not something the farm community itself is necessarily panicked about, we have to talk about why people who write the news are panicking about it when the farmers aren't. The easy explanation for this is, well, panicky farm headlines get clicks, and also, people who write the news are lazy and they don't do their homework. We could be asking, why do those headlines get clicks? Why don't journalists do their homework when it comes to agriculture? We should probably take some responsibility for why we love to click on panicky headlines about farms and not just, blame clicks, right? Why do we do that? And instead of just going, reporters are lazy, we should probably ask, Why aren't they doing their homework? The simple, easy answers don't actually answer anything. We should find out why these things are happening. And I think our love of lazy farm headlines really just comes down to we all kind of grew up reading Little House on the Prairie and Grapes of Wrath. We learned that rural equals tragedy, farmer equals tragedy. Therefore, anytime something happens on a farm or in agriculture or in rural areas, it's gotta be a tragedy. When you talk to people about agriculture, so many will say, well, I just don't know that much about it. Here's the thing, you don't have to know anything about agriculture to think critically about it, just a little bit. If you see headlines about how all these farmers who are growing peaches for canning are ripping their trees out, maybe stop and think, when's the last time I had canned peaches? Maybe consumption's going down. Maybe that's why this is happening. It's just kind of weird to be in a position where we're in a world where everything's going sideways right now, but I keep having to tell people that's not a problem. You don't have to worry about this. The US farm sector is just a lot more capable than a lot of people think, including a lot of people in the farm sector. And I just think it would be really helpful if we were treated that way too. That's your headline for today. Y'all do good out there.